But I'm going to hand over then to Sizwe to introduce himself, and then to Billy, and taking us further along this discussion here tonight. And thank you very much for the two of you joining us and sharing with us tonight. Maybe just that people know, Sizwe landed up sitting in a car due to connectivity. So thank you for even joining us tonight from your car. And I'm handing over.
Well, thank you, Chris. I didn't have an alternative. I had to make it work. So thank you. And sure, already I'm intimidated by the of profession. But at the very same time, I'm honored to have received an invite to be part of the group tonight. I just hope everyone can hear me clearly.
You come through very clearly.
Okay.
Very good.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for having us. My name is Sizwe Samajobe. In short, they call me Sizwe. Sithole. I come from the place called Ladysmith, and I'm just in Ladysmith right now as I'm talking to you. The connection is really bad, hence I had to sit in the car, like in the middle of the park that is just like a kilometer away from home, but it's safe. I'm okay, and I'm happy to be part of this discussion. One thing that I can share with the group is that I am a trans person who is currently registered with the School of Religion, Philosophy and Classics. I'm also trying to fine-tune my PhD on transgender identities in the Zion Church. But I'm sort of like trying to not just do any other PhD, but I'm trying to do a PhD that is going to actually assist in formulating the tools and the theories that are going to assist churches like African independent churches to have better tools and to have better theories of engaging with trans people. That is coming out of my own personal experience navigating the faith space, and as a person who was born and who has recently returned to church, that has the African independent churches have always been very important in my life, and it's the only faith denomination that resonates with me, and that sort of gives me that freedom of being free and being myself in the presence of the Lord. So hence I have made it my mission to actually make sure that I sort of like assist the church in finding better tools and theories to engage with trans and gender diverse people. My pronouns are he, him, his, and at the moment, I live with my partner in Pietermaritzburg full time. I work as the publications manager at the Cluster Publications. It's a part-time job, as I'm also trying to actually get going with my PhD. But at the very same time, I'm actually assisting in the academic journal called the Alterations. I'm just the assistant editor there. Yeah, briefly, that is Sizwe for you. I have 4 siblings at the moment that I reside with at home, and my mother is turning 70 next year. Yeah, we've just had a very interesting conversations in the past few months or the past year or so. Maybe some of it I will share with you tonight. And I must say, I'm really now scared. If I look at the group, I thought it was going to be maybe a small group, 5 or 6 people. But anyways, yeah, I'm glad everyone is here. Without any waste of time, I know it's late. Let me just first mention that I sort of like told my colleague Billy that I'm not so much very fond of very formal presentations. So I would like us to just have a conversation. So I'm going to call him my conversation partner. And sorry, Billy, for just assuming that you are a he. Maybe the first thing that I would like you to share with the group is your pronouns so that I get them right as well. But Billy is a colleague of mine from the School of Religion, and he's got such a beautiful bio, of which I'm tempted to read all of it because it's very interesting. But because of time, I'm just going to mention that we work together at the School of Religion. That is where I actually came to know and to meet Billy, and we have had like beautiful conversations in the corridor, but also as students who are trying to go on in research. So we have journeyed not quite a lot, but a bit, but we are still on the journey together. Um, Billy has shared with me on the bio that he was born in 1967 during the apartheid times in South Africa, but he's traveled quite some time both in Africa and one of the things that I'm actually boasting about and happy to introduce is that they are an expert in biblical studies, and they hold a PhD in New Testament from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in 2003. But they are almost a graduate, master's graduate of education from UCT. So they are not like done with education, so they continue to do research. And at the moment, if Billy is not actually teaching at UKZN, he has mentioned that they are doing fiber of art in knitting and in crocheting, and I'm a witness. Whenever we are sitting in meetings, you will actually find Billy crocheting something. So that has been part of their life. Supervisor, as I'm trying to get my PhD going, but also with Ustembi Sozwane, who is working at the Ujama Center in the school. So they are actually doing amazing work, especially using instruments of contextual Bible study to sort of like talk to the each or actually to embrace the resilience that is out there in communities in the face of the GBV, gender-based violence, and also in the times where we are seeing the rise of the incidences of hate crime. So they are actually using or tapping into the instruments that has been used most of the time to discriminate against queer or trans and gender queer, and I would say just queer and trans and gender diverse people as a whole in South Africa, which is the Bible. So they are actually finding new ways of reading the Bible and to find redemptive ways of engaging the Bible, sex, and sexuality. And without any delay, let me just allow Dr. Meyer to actually say something. and to actually greet the group, and we can have our conversation from there. Billy.
Hi, hello. I suppose the other interesting or pertinent issue about my life is that I have a child called Beth or Bethany or Benjamin, who is defined, oh, my brain is not going there at the moment. It defines themselves as, that's right, asexual and non-binary. Sorry, I'm worried. I've got a dog sitting next to me I'm worried it's going to bark. And so so I have a child who is on the trans spectrum, asexual, non-binary. So I've been getting lots of education from my child on all of these issues.
Wow, interesting. Thank you. Maybe Billy, just briefly, if you can just share your pronouns with us.
Yeah, basically I use he, him. I probably wouldn't mind being they. I'm getting used to they now that I have to call Ben they. So yeah, I think I'm pronoun diverse, perhaps.
Wow, that is very interesting. Maybe just to share with the group that we are not going to have so much of a formal presentation, but we are going to sort of like have a conversation, of which I would like to invite the group to be part of the conversation. Whenever as we are talking, they feel like maybe there is something that comes up that they want clarity on, maybe they have a burning question, then they are welcome to actually stop us and actually raise their hand to actually be appointed to talk. I hope that is okay with everyone. Is that okay with everyone? Are we still together?
Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up here. I think we're fine.
We're fine.
That sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Cool. Billy, I am a transgender person. I can safely say I'm a trans masculine person who is so much in a relationship with a female partner. And just to give you a brief context, we have a daughter. I have a stepdaughter, so to say, and she's 17 years old. We live together, and I have had quite a journey myself as a transgender person, navigating and becoming visible as I journey along in the spaces of faith, in the spaces of tradition, in spaces of culture. And I have had quite an experience in my journey, but I think I have a few questions that I would like to ask you, and I want to say you are also welcome to actually ask me questions as we are having a chat, and this is open to everyone else who is part of this conversation. As the person who actually grew up in the Christian home, so very much grounded into the faith, into the Christian faith tradition. I grew up knowing that every Sunday I have to go to church and I have to abide by the rules of the church and also by the rules of the Bible. The Bible being the authoritative book that is guiding my life. But there cometh a time in my life where when I couldn't just be part of the church simply because I was growing up, and some of the things that were happening in my body, I couldn't make sense of them. And when I actually sat down to read the Bible, some of the things were really not as clear and as straightforward as my parents maybe had hoped they were. So just to actually have a question to ask you, as someone who is an expert in the biblical studies, I just want to check with you, what are the main things that the Bible is saying specifically with or about the LGBTIQA people?
Okay, thanks, Sizwe. So what we can talk about when we talk about the Bible and what we might call the God hates fags narrative, in a sense, coming out from the Bible, is three groups of texts. We start with the classic text from Genesis 19. It's the text about Sodom, and it's about groups of men threatening sexual violence to other men. It's linked with another text called from Judges 19, where a very similar kind of thing happens. Then we have text from Leviticus from chapter 18 and chapter 20. And those texts then get quoted in the Christian scripture in 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy. And what we have there, I think, is, I think fairly clear prohibition against men having sex with men. The Greek word that's used in all of those texts is arsenokoitai. And what it means is something like lying with a man. Okay, or sleeping with a man. Right. Basically some kind of euphemistic thing of having sex with a man, men having sex with a man. And then the last text is from Romans chapter 1. And that's a very interesting text because it's all this idea of natural and unnatural. And it talks about the idea of men exchanging natural sexual relations for unnatural. And then, interestingly, among Bible texts, it says women also exchange natural sex for unnatural. And so those are the three groups of texts that, are really part of the narrative of hate that comes from the Bible.
Wow. Thank you. As you are talking, I'm taken aback because as a person who has indicated that I'm coming from a Christian faith tradition, one of the texts that was used to sort of like bash my identity is that of Genesis 19, the Gomorrah and Sodom attacks.
Yeah.
And one of the very probing questions that I've had with that text is the context. If I look into that text and trying to understand the text as a transgender person who so loves to worship and to be in the space of worship, someone who's so much vested into having time with or to congress with fellow brethren in worshiping Christ. if I look into that text, was it really that text referring to romantic love, or was that text, is that text in any way usable to sort of like speak really into the realities of the LGBTIQA people?
Yeah, so I think that text has been misapplied. I mean, sure, there are men there who want to have sex with other men, and there's threatening sexual violence. But in fact, this text has actually, in other texts that quote this text in the Bible, have actually understood it as a text about a failure of hospitality. And so these gangs, the gangs of men of Sodom, the gangs of the men of Benjamin in the other text, what they're doing is actually coming and asserting a kind of xenophobia, okay? And what they're coming to do, they threaten to rape these men because they want to dishonor them, okay?
Right.
And in fact, what you find, I mean, and that's in a way makes it worse, makes it what Phyllis Tribble calls a text of terror, is in fact, in both cases, a woman is then offered to the men. And in the Genesis text, in fact, the angels, who are also the men, actually come and rescue both the Lot, the father, and the women. But in the more terrible Judges text, the woman is actually thrown out of the house to this group of men who obviously perpetrate terrible sexual violence against her. So these things are understood as actually it's more about gender violence than about anything to do with romantic love or anything to do with sexual orientation. Yeah, and it's only later that it came to be interpreted as you know, being against men having sex with other men.
Okay. Thank you, Billy, for that.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking about looking into our context as we are navigating the spaces. Currently, we are talking about men who are sleeping with men, which in short we call MSM. And I'm also looking into the text, and the text is using the word if I heard you correctly, I stand to be corrected here. You said the original interpretation of, sorry about that. The original interpretation of the text is that when the angels were actually wanting to sleep with when the men of Sodom came out, they actually called the men to sleep with them. So that is like men sleeping with men. So can this text also be used against people who are men sleeping with men?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, I mean, as I said, that Leviticus text it seems to be very clear about, it's about, but I think if you contextualize it, what's really, you need to understand that it's part of a purity code. It's about trying to have the Jewish people, the Israelite people being separate from the people around them. But and they putting these purity issues in case, and it's part of a general list of things that pollute the body. So in fact, There are other forms of forbidden sex. There's forbidden food, general forbidden practices, which are what people are trying to, they're trying to differentiate themselves from other people who, in a sense, they say, do these kind of things. And it's interesting then when it gets quoted in the New Testament, things like slander and gossip are in the same list as, sleeping with men, and another word which probably means sleeping around a lot. And so what we see is that in the context, there are prohibitions about a whole lot of things, but those prohibitions are about the community, protecting the community, and not, again, so much fixating. I think it's a very modern thing to become fixated on the idea of gay, queer, LGBT, these being against this group of people. Yeah, so I think, yeah.
Sorry, so is it safe to say maybe when we look into those texts, they were not specifically targeting LGBTIQA people?
No, I don't. Well, there's very few that target LGBTQIA people, and there's a whole lot more emphasis on all sorts of other behaviors that can be problematic in a community. I see we have a hand here from Bumelelo. Do you have a question?
Yes. The question is, let me start with the question. The question is, what then creates this misinterpretation? At which point does the misinterpretation happen now to bring on this like hate breeding ground? Because I really resonate with Sodom and Gomorrah, where we were talking about the fact that it's actually the fact that they were treating guests in such a horrible way, and not in a way of love, which is the principle that the Bible is sort of built on. So what creates this change is the first question, and then the second comment I think is around like I think a lot of like Leviticus was I think men filling holes that they couldn't understand within the context of what they were given. So when they were given these things, this is what you're supposed to do, and then they constructed these man-made things. Hence, I think when Jesus then comes, he's like, yo, what are all these things that you have constructed to sort of separate yourself? So that was the second comment, but my main comment was asking about what creates this misinterpretation, because I think if we get to the root of what creates this misinterpretation, it gives us a space to correct it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I think it basically, it is, it's the patriarchy. The intersection of sort of cis male power, straight sort of sexuality, and kind of a fear. And they're trying to protect against things like gender diversity, and trying to sort of close in the community and not have anything that can disrupt it. And I think you make a point that I was going to make later, but I'll make it now. I think exactly Jesus comes in there, and what you see him, I mean, the phrase used in the gospel, he eats with tax collectors and sinners. And that means those are all the people who are in some senses considered as violating these Levitical laws. Women who are not properly in marriages, people who pollute themselves with foreign money. And yeah, we don't know who else is there, but could well have been. I would like to believe that Jesus would include LGBTQIA, trans, everybody in his group, because he was we really believe he was about radical guest friendship. And so I think that is a very powerful thing. So actually, Sizwe, I'm taking a question back to you. Have you had some texts that have been used to bash you?
Yes, I have a number of times. I was actually sort of like told that I'm actually not fully embracing the nature of God if I introduce myself as a transgender person in church. One of the verses that was used that I remember that actually is even today sitting here in my forehead, because it was used so much, is that of Deuteronomy 22 verse 5, if I'm not mistaken. A woman cannot dress like a man and a man cannot dress like a woman. So for that verse was used for me to actually, I don't know whether it was some form of conscientizing me to say I'm actually twisting or turning the nature of God into something that is ridiculous and something that is not going to stand. Because I remember there was an incident this one time. I decided to go to church with my partner. And funny enough, because when we actually walked into the church, it was during the time of the word. The pastor was already reading the word. And I remember that he had opened the book of Timothy. But immediately when we walked into the room, the text changed at the pulpit. And the whole sermon was now about the LGBTIQA plus people, and how ridiculous we are in trying to think that we can change the nature of God. So that has been one of the many texts that were used. Again, as I indicated earlier on, that also the Gomorrah and Sodom part was the text was actually used to bash me and to sort of like ridicule my identity. So it's been happening. It's been one of the things that myself as a transgender person has pushed me to sort of like wanting into actually explore and actually get more involved into journeying in the faith community, because I wanted to understand their reasoning. I wanted to understand their interpretation, how it gets to the point of what is nature and what is not nature. And that actually prompted me to further my studies, because I was actually okay with my honors. I was happy with my honors. But then as these things were happening, and as I was trying to get to church and to get back into the faith community, these texts actually began to pop up, and they continued to pop up. And that's when I eventually started to think more about transgender people and the faith community, not only in Pietermaritzburg, because I believe that my life is between Pietermaritzburg and Ladysmith and the other parts of South Africa. Those are the spaces that I navigate because of my work, but also because I am working with different LGBTI organizations that actually deal and work with the LGBTIQA community. So yeah, so that's been my experience.
So I was also wanting to ask, while you're talking about that, are there other, in the spiritual and cultural space, are there other challenges you face since you've become visible as a trans person?
Sure. With the cultural spaces, I have been met with mixed challenges, both happy and sad challenges. One of the things that I can actually mention that is very positive for me is that since I have taken a step of actually becoming visible and refusing to be put aside and to be sidelined, starting with my family, what I have seen is that I am getting more support from the family, but also I am now seeing my family pushing me forward into taking spaces that are normally and usually dominated by men within the Zulu cultural spaces. And that on its own for me is a sign for change. But one thing that has come up consistently is that I get misgendered easily, and sometimes I have to read the context and the situation at that particular point in time that I find myself in, because some of the times you find that people out me on purpose, and some of the times you find that I am outed, and then when you actually take a hold back and reading the person who has just outed you, you can see the shock in the person's body that, oh, I said something wrong, and without me having to point it out to them. And I found that to be happening most of the time with my family and with my family members. But it has been interesting to see the change that has happened with me becoming visible, with my nephews and my nieces at home. It's for them, it feels like I have tapped into the space that they have long known, but they didn't know how to address it. So it's been a mix of challenges for me. But another thing that I think I can share with you is that since becoming visible and taking a stand to be my true self in cultural spaces, I have come across two or three people who have sort of like affirmed my identity. One of them being a prophetess who's a member in the church, in saying, so that her affirmation came out as some form of a prophecy, if I may say that. It came out as a form of a prophecy to say, now you are okay. Now you can actually proceed and journey where your father left off. So now it's like, now you are your father's son to continue. We've been waiting. And that for me has sort of like pushed me into thinking more about how one is sort of like perceived and understood within the cultural and the traditional spaces where ancestors are involved, especially if you think about African spirituality, because one of the very significant thing that has happened for me in the past year or so is that during the time when my mother was very sick, she had to come and stay with me for quite some time, and we just had a talk about my identity and my partner and all of that. And when I actually took the conversation to speak about my identity, she just pushed it all together into the space of understanding my identity, not using the Western terminologies, but understanding my identity as that that is contained and influenced by the spirits of the living dead. So that for her was something that she could not take away from me, and that is something that even today she is embracing it. So that has been part of my journey, and it continues to sort of like push me into thinking more about the intersections that are there between around gender identity and African spirituality, and the way in which we talk about our identity in our identities within the realm of African spirituality.
So do you think that's the way forward, in fact, is to perhaps start to develop indigenous African terminology for talking about gender, sexuality, and for instance, like trans identities? Do you think that's really where we should be going?
I think for me that can be one of the ways. That can be one of the ways, because I know that since I became visible and started to talk about my identity, embracing the understanding that is there within my family compound, of understanding that my identity is not disconnected to my ancestral spirits. That has sort of like made my life a bit easy. As I'm sitting here tonight, I'm not sitting here just as Sizwe, but I am sitting here as the leader of my family. I am sitting here as the person whom they await to listen to and to take orders from on how to proceed with the ceremony. And for them, that has become like a point of being appointed by the ancestors to be the leader of the family. And no one can actually take that role except me. And it's very, for me, it has been very interesting, because it has even touched into the way in which they interpret my name. You know, when I came to my mother, I said, you know, Mom, actually I'm not happy with the name that you've given me at birth, and I've just taken it out. I'm just, you know, doing a new ID with Home Affairs. And then she was like, then what is your name? And then I said, my name is Sizwe. And then she finished it off, and then she said, Sizwe Samajob. And then I was like, oh, that was easy for you to finish. And then sorry about that. I'm sitting with another phone here. I'm using it for light. And then from there, that's when she started to open up and say, I can understand if they call you Sizwe, because some of the things were prophesied. You were young, but now they begin to make sense. So it's like my life cannot be separated from the spiritual life that has been set before me. And that is how they understand my life as a transgender person. So it has been an interesting but also, you know, a learning journey on the other hand, because I have learned as well to be patient with them, because they have taken me into the space of thinking about the amount of time that one takes to find themselves. And as soon as you are content, as soon as you are free into understanding who you are, then you rush into pushing people to sort of like accept and get it right with you and your identity. But I think my family has taught me that now and then, you know, there is that moment where they will just slip around. No, not they will just slip up. Sorry, they will just slip up and use my slave name or my dead name, but not necessarily because they mean any harm, but because they are still also learning the language of being inclusive and also of being open to me as the person that I am.
So Anele has a question.
Yes, I do. So my question is this, I don't know if I'll be able to articulate it well, but how do we then create spaces of mentorship or break down the rearing process or initiation and indoctrination process that creates boundaries for gender non-conforming people in spiritual organizations and religious organizations? Because it's something that's quite strong and quite apparent that's there. Like you said, you are now in a position of leadership, both in the social sense, but also I guess in the spiritual sense in your family. And perhaps that may translate in other areas in your life and in the church that you serve in, or the religious organization that you serve in. How do we then start creating spaces where we say, okay, this person who is gender non-conforming, does need mentorship and does need guidance. And oftentimes that is very structured in a way where females are expected to have this role. You will be the usher, you will collect the offerings, you will sing in the church choir, and the males will be the ones who are attending to this or tending to that, and making sure that the reverend is taken care of. Whatever structured roles that are created in these organizations, how do we then redefine them? And how do we create spaces where it is safe for the gender non-conforming people, for the transgender people to take up spaces in those roles that were otherwise reserved for other people or otherwise close to other people? Who teaches you how to lead? Who helps you get there? Who shows you the ropes in spaces where you are now expected to take up the space? You're now expected to perform, but you didn't actually really get anybody to help you. How do we navigate that space?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Anele, for that question. And I must say, it's not easy. Anele, I cannot lie to you. It's not easy, and it has not been easy. Especially because the truth is that we are living in our spaces are covered with persistent systemic structures that actually enforces patriarchy, and it feels like each and every day it's deepening. But one thing that I know and that I'm taking from my own lived experience is that I was tired of waiting. I was tired of waiting to be recognized. I was tired of standing there at the back of the line, waiting for someone to call me. I took a decision that I have had enough. I grew up in this area. I am of this church, and there has to be a space for me. And from that moment, that is when I I started very slowly to to actually make allies in different ways. Like when I come back home, I would actually go and visit one of the elders, and we will just have a conversation. So this is what we call in Zulu testing waters. I would test waters by actually making those visits to the old elder to the elders of the church. I will actually go into places when they are having like conferences, and then and actually be around the crowd, not so much there at the front, but be in the crowd, just to get a sense of what it's like to be amongst them, and just to see if when I walk in, embracing my identity as a transgender person, because understand that when I left the church, I was expected to dress more like in a feminine form, wear a skirt, have a doek on, that sort of thing, and I couldn't live with that. And I started to actually dodge the church. I would not finish the whole service. I would
Oh dear, it looks like we've been struck with connectivity issues. We've been very lucky to keep them so far. I mean, I don't know if I can comment while Sizwe is hopefully reconnecting. I thought, here I'm going. His comment, and also Ron's comment, the way that like a religious practitioner, a prophetess, or a traditional healer or something would come and confirm and say that this gender identity that you're embracing now, something you're picking up your father's legacy and things. I think that can be a very powerful thing when in a sense the elders and the older people of the community can start to embrace new identities, but using cultural forms. I think that can be very powerful. And I think, as people can begin to embrace, particularly trans people, but also all LGBTQIA people, I think this can, it gets tiny bit easier each time. I don't know if anybody has, while we wait for Sizwe, have any other questions about the Bible? Or okay, Ron and then Chris.
Hi, thanks, Billy. Maybe more. Hello, hi, just kind of maybe a reflection as I was listening. The one thing, the one aspect that has struck me so far, and of course I have to own my positionality, as a spiritual person, not practicing in a religion, and obviously my own cultural background. But the one aspect that kind of struck me in the narrative so far is there seems to be this parallel of African cultural, spiritual, paradigms and belief systems, and then the more kind of almost dare I say, colonizing traditional religious, paradigms of Christianity. And it often sounds to me that where they intersect, and what I'm hearing, and I guess that's the question is, am I hearing that more often than not, the African cultural, spiritual paradigms seem to come to the aid, to the support of your LGBTQIA individual, more so than necessarily the traditional kind of Christian, for example, doctrine. And we know that obviously those two aspects intersect for many of our communities. So that was the one element that struck me. And I don't know if that's a fair reflection. And the second is with Sizwe's narrative so far, I guess it seems like much of the change seems to depend on the individual being willing to stand in their truth, and to, like Sizwe was saying, that he was no longer willing to be invisible. He was going to stand up and be himself, take up space, be visible. And I'm wondering how much of that is still very much the dynamic versus the bigger system accepting responsibility, and to say, well, do we as a, religious system and or cultural system, where's our responsibility to say, hey, there are these members of our society that we maybe didn't know enough about before, didn't understand before, weren't that visible necessarily before, but now they are speaking up and they're becoming more visible. Where's our responsibility as a system to say, okay, well, maybe we need to pay attention here, we need to listen? And because it seems like the load of the responsibility still then ends up on the individual trans and gender diverse person's shoulders to kind of almost like navigate the change that needs to happen. Anyway, so those were just some of the reflections that I found myself thinking as I was listening.
So perhaps Chris and then Tamarin and Mpumelelo would like to come in and make their comments or ask their questions.
Yeah, also a reflection, but maybe in that also a bit of a question. With a lot of my clients, as they go through their own journeys and also embracing their own gender identity, sometimes sexuality, quite often they would also find text in the Bible or in their religious text, whichever they come from, that affirms them. For example, I had the other day a client that said that text about there's no Greek or Jew, there's no man or woman anymore, that was exceptionally affirming to them. And I just wonder a lot around how much spirituality in the end also plays a role in the affirmation of a person's gender identity. And a lot of them would also have a story about, for example, going to the temple and have an epiphany there, realizing that, for example, my soul is feminine, although my body was assigned male at birth, and thus I changed my body to fit my soul. And those type of elements. So those are some of my wonders and reflections.
Tamarin?
Is it my turn?
Sorry,
I
guys.
think Tamarin and
the
then
whole
Mpumelelo.
unmuting and stopping video at the same time was just a little bit too much for me at the same time there. I just had a question that I wanted to ask Sizwe, but it seems that he seems to have lost connectivity. But I was just wondering, and this is just something kind of maybe anybody can just jump in and maybe give some reflections from your point of view, if you have a take on this. And something that I always find very, very interesting is how people are able to integrate within themselves both their cultural belief systems or kind of belief systems of origin. Oh, I see Sizwe's back again. Sizwe, I don't know if you can hear me. I think maybe I'll, okay. Sizwe, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I've kind of really been always interested, and this is something I wonder a lot about, and that is how people are able to integrate, where they're kind of brought up both coming from a traditional kind of African background in terms of their culture, and more or less, obviously, levels of identification with that, as well as having been brought up with some kind of Christian religious background, and how people are able to put that together and kind of make that work for them. Because my understanding is that the kind of principles and belief systems are so different in many ways that it's always fascinated me. So I'm just interested in any perspectives on that. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, Sizwe, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry everyone. Please pardon me. I just I was on my phone, and my phone just died. The battery just died. So I'm connecting with my laptop now. So I actually glad that I brought a backup plan. Yeah, so I'm sorry about that disconnection earlier on.
So Tamarin was asking you about how do you hold together Christianity and African culture, that she seems to see that these are often quite contradictory systems. And so how do you hold those two together?
Wow, thank you. I think the one thing that I am actually not too sure about is the contradiction part, how they contradict each other, because my experience has been that since growing up from an early age, I had witnessed, I grew up being raised by a parent who was both a sangoma and a church leader, and he was able to balance the two, and he constantly shared stories with me as I was growing up, that I must never be at some point in a space where I doubt that that prayer or Christian faith contradict traditional religion. Basically, there is a way that the two can actually be intertwined and work together for the better good of the person or for the better good of the community. And most of the time, my father would actually take me with him when he goes to heal someone or go to a certain family to actually perform the healing rituals. And one thing that I witnessed and one thing that I realized is that each time before anything else, he would kneel down and pray and actually ask God to guide him as he's working with this particular person or with this particular family through the process of healing. So that for me was something very valuable and something that I'm still appreciating today, because I can easily say, and I can proudly say, that I am a believer. Let me just say that I am a believer. I am a Christian, but I also do practice traditional religion. Like as I'm sharing with you that even right now I'm here at home,
I will be slaughtering a goat. Tomorrow I will be slaughtering a cow, simply just to perform this traditional ceremony. And the two, they do not contradict each other. They do not even conflate each other, because each time I do a ceremony, or each time I am asked to lead a ceremony, the first thing that I do is pray. I pray with my family. I pray with the people who are involved. We ask for God to be with us and to guide us. And after that, we proceed with whatever ceremony that is expected to be done.
Yeah, if I could just comment very briefly, I think we often think that Christianity, you know, the Western Christianity that came with the missionaries is, you know, doesn't have cultural baggage. And yet I think it has huge amounts of cultural baggage. And very often the contradictions will actually be between Western cultural expectations and African cultural expectations. And we can see this in the Bible going way back, that you might have Jewish versus Greek cultural expectations coming into a clash. Okay, Mpumelelo, you had a question?
Okay. I'd also like to comment on Tamarin's question, in that African churches, or I'm not sure of the term, are sort of like a breakaway from like the churches that were the other denominations, and they have existed in a while and sort of like intertwining the two. So it would be something also interesting to look up and read up on churches such as Izayoni or Shembe. There are quite a few churches that already incorporate the two. And I have quite a few thoughts. I think in the introduction I should have said I'm a thinker, because these are the things that bother my mind as also a trans person. Woo! So, excuse me, my cat is doing other things. I don't know. Are you okay? Excuse me. Okay, so I think, there are so many thoughts. All right, I think where I will start off, I think, is just like looking at Christianity. I grew up heavily Christian. I grew up in a church called the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which really takes like a huge initiative in like indoctrination and things like that. So I think I like to think that I'm pretty versed in the Bible for this case. Otherwise, I am not personally a Christian myself. Because of a few things, but mostly because of having to accept that Christianity comes with colonization, and they both married in this way. And so Christianity enforces and upholds these patriarchy and all these other different things, but also Christianity is responsible for the binary, which is responsible for so much misunderstanding and so much like violence towards trans folks and queer folks in general. And so in being that, in upholding these beliefs, what do they say, like the chickens coming home to roost when there's then violence that is perpetuated towards trans folks and queer folks in general. And I think within African spirituality, another thing we were talking about was about like the affirmation and what happens, or how why or how it tends to be that people are affirmed by African spirituality. And I have this idea that African and indigenous folks did not have the same function of gender than the West. So when Christianity came with enforcing all these different, the binary, there's man and woman, there's those sort of functions of gender, it totally shifts something in them. And then, but they still uphold their spiritual essence, because a lot of African spirituality is rooted in the fact that your spirituality, your spirit, your soul is your essence, like it is who you are. So they are able to translate those better. They are able to make sense of that. For example, I'll make an example. I won't put a label, but I carry intonga, which is a sort of staff, which was given to me by my ancestors. For context, I was assigned female at birth. And so when people look at me, they're like, what is a woman doing with a staff? This is supposed to be a man thing. What are you doing? And immediately men go into this sort of panic of why are you carrying a staff? What? And then the first thing I say, and they come to me like straight up, like random men. And I've seen masculinity really being in my face and being like, give me the staff, as if it does not belong to you. Why are you carrying this staff? Justify yourself. And over again, I've justified myself because my ancestors have sort of affirmed me in saying, yo, you can carry this. So what I usually say to them, I even have like a little thing that I say to them. I say to them, you don't know who I am moving with, number one. Number two, you don't know who I am. You are making an assumption. And usually they'd say, finding Gabi parts about prophets. I say, what if Minagum prophet? Why are you looking at me with that eye? And immediately these old men who otherwise, if I were to speak of my transness or with any sort of like deviation of gender, would be totally baffled. But now that I'm speaking in spirituality code, they switch the lens and they can understand a little bit more easier and be like, oh yes, I do know that sometimes there is this understanding. So I think in trying to create spaces also for queer folks, I was just thinking about the question that Anele had. It would be very interesting to break the binary down completely, even within Christianity, because I think in trying to create spaces, it only protects like these number of people, but does not spill over and help people really understand. There's then this point of pretense. There is this point of being, I understand. I use, or people use your pronouns in front of you, but when they're alone, it becomes a totally different idea of like, but we are accepting, we are tolerating. But I think it is more to see. And if to see is to love someone, like if you really love someone, you really see them 100%. And I think that parallel is really interesting to me, which is not really a parallel, but I'm just really interested in looking at how Indigenous folks have and what is their function of gender. And then I think the question that I had on sin was, I've been thinking about how sin puts so much pressure on the individual, like do not steal, right? Put so much pressure on the individual when we know that these things are created by colonization and capitalism. That person is only stealing maybe because they're really hungry. It's all these things, all the problems are taken and they're put into the individual. And they're saying, you were the problem. You were supposed to sort it out. You have committed a sin. What is like, you are inherently wrong. And even the communities that we know this is wrong, but we are tolerating you only because of, I think my question is on sin, on what really is sin? Because sin has been used to be like, you are sinful. What really is sin? And and in now looking at, yes, bro, I actually am asking you in like looking at it from also a capitalism point of view and a colonization point of view, because that's also my problem with Christianity, is that it was enforced in such a, it was colonization basically. Could you please?
Yeah, Pumelelo, you are so passionate. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I want to affirm that you said is this idea of how love creates acceptance. And I think we've seen that in Sizwe's family. And I mean, we've experienced it in our family as well, with Beth coming out as asexual and then non-binary. And the way we now call them by them and Ben, sometimes I alternate Beth and Ben because they want to keep both their names. So I mean, I really agree with a lot of stuff you said about capitalism and the problem of the connection of Christianity with colonialism. And I'm not going to even try and get into sin because thank God I'm not a systematic theologian. But yeah, except to say that sin is like, it's a weapon. It's a weapon of power to silence other people. Okay, and then finally, I think we have a question from Kavesh.
Yeah, thank you very much for that interesting discussion. Just continuing the discussion around sin, I think it's a way for us to brand other people as different from us. And I think a lot of what has happened in the past is that perhaps in terms of Christianity, especially being a colonial religion, coming to Africa, and they've branded Africans as unsophisticated or not lacking in knowledge, lacking in being uncivilized. When you look at that label of sin that hasn't been that's been applied. So I think that's really an important point in that when we label, or when anyone labels something other or somebody else is sinful, it's about othering. It's about non-acceptance. It's about being unlovable. And then I just want to also just point out, like having been brought up in a Hindu home myself and being quite spiritual, but also understanding that the soul, as it was, I know there was a comment made that, you know, the soul is feminine and my body is masculine, so therefore I need to bring my body in line with the soul. In a similar belief as to that, we believe that the soul doesn't have a gender or sex. So it can exist in a continuum similar to what we would understand now as the gender spectrum, as the spectrum that doesn't exist as wholly masculine or wholly feminine, but in numerous gradations or non-gradations of that also. And I think in that sense, what makes people really uncomfortable now is, again, the Western idea that there is only a male and a female, which is really, really an important thing to note. So that was just an interesting thing for me. Just to bring another point in terms of the Hinduism, the doctrine of reincarnation, whereas the soul exists in numerous different lifetimes, both as male or female, or every different gradation of that. So that's also an interesting thought to bring into the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Kavesh, and thank you everybody who've been, you know, really sharing with us. I think Sizwe is going to round us off, but I think what I would like to say to round off is that the work that we try to do with the Bible in our school at the University of KwaZulu-Natal is to find redemptive masculinities, sexualities, redemptive ways of talking about these things that don't label them as sin, that understand, you know, have a much broader, deeper understanding of sexuality and gender. And I think, yeah, that's what our work is trying to do. So we get, Sizwe is going to wrap up now with his final comments.
Yeah, wow. This is very much interesting, and I'm so very much intrigued by Mpumelelo's comments, and I'm even more interested to sort of like connect with you so that we can continue to think. Yeah, because I think, you know, the things that you are actually touching are very important. It's part of the things that should become our daily topics that we talk about every day, and we should be conversing around these things. But I think one of the things that I've been wrestling with myself as the transgender person who is thinking of better ways, and maybe the formulation of tools and theories that are going to assist not specifically the LGBTIQA community, but the society as a whole, to be able to engage in civilized and dialogue where we reach a point where a conversation creates life affirming spaces for queer people in general. So one of the things that I've been wrestling with is really, what is it that African indigenous knowledge systems has to offer to Christian knowledge, or maybe just to think of African spirituality. How can African spirituality offer some tools of engaging a Bible, or maybe even opening it up for better acceptance and for better life affirming interpretations? So that is one of the things that I'm sort of like wrestling with every day, and I'm trying to think if there is a way that the two can actually assist each other, and out of it we actually come up with a tool that is going to be best used by queer people, but also by the community at large, as a way of transforming lives and affirming lives, you know, and offer life affirming spaces. But before I go any further, let me just say thank you, and again, sorry for the breakup that had to happen because of the battery. And Billy, thank you so much for such a wonderful and intriguing conversation. I know you have said that you have wrapped up, but I just have one question, and then maybe that will be just a wrapping up question. Any messages that you can think of that are positive from the Bible for the LGBTIQA people?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going back to what I was saying to Mpumelelo. I think just the person of Jesus, and the way that Jesus radically included people who the religious authorities considered dirty and polluted. You know, people who were unclean, and he would embrace lepers, he would include tax collectors, he would include sinners. I mean, damn, Mpumelelo, we're going back to your word of sin. Yeah. And that Jesus kind of didn't consider this thing, that this sin was a label from the religious authorities. And I think Jesus didn't consider it. He radically accepted people. And I've even yeah. So I mean, I think that can be a message of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't listen to what your church says. You kind of try and listen to the voice of Jesus.
Well, thank you so much, Billy. Let me just say thank you to everyone who actually took their time to come and listen to us and to sort of like engage with us, to discuss with us. We really appreciate you. It has been wonderful and great. But I just want to close up this discussion or this dialogue with one of the very important words that I hold dearly into my heart. That, you know, spirituality frees the spirit. When the spirit is free, then the soul is at peace. Then you are able to fly. We are meant to fly, and we are meant to prosper. And those were the words that were shared to me by my father. And I'm happy to have been part of this conversation. And I just hope that we can think a bit more about spirituality and how it can free us as human beings to be our true selves. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, and from our side, Sizwe and Billy, thank you very much for coming to share tonight with us. I don't think we were too intimidating in the end. And for each person that joined us, I think it was a wonderful opportunity to also listen to these wise words from these two gurus, if we may call you that. And may we keep on doing hope, and we meet up again end of next month for a new topic. So thank you, everybody, and take care.